I first met Rob and Doug in Oxford Street. They were sweeping it at the top.
It was always our ambition, Doug and mine, to have our own sitcom.
There was something new about the whole thing.
It was groundbreaking, it was different.
Original, innovative.
Fabulous, but it was a space comedy, for God's sake.
Rob and I both had this kind of half feeling that people would go, "Oi, what are you doing? You know, you shouldn't be here."
We really didn't know what we were doing.
My major concern was I didn't think it was that funny. And when we were doing the read-throughs and things like that, and people like the writers, Doug and Rob, and the people in the rehearsal room, the laughter seemed really forced. They seemed to be laughing in the places they thought that people would laugh. But to me, I was thinking, what are they laughing at,
The part eventually goes to Craig, who it turns out doesn't think it's funny, but Craig needed the comfort blanket of jokes, and there weren't too many there.
I thought the first script was great. There were others who didn't, but I thought the first script was great. Fred Molina thought it was good. Alan Rickman thought it was good.
Paul Jackson gave me the script. I phoned back and said, give me that part. But the only reason was not because I thought it was like, this is absolutely brilliant. It was because Paul Jackson was doing it. And if Paul Jackson was doing it, if he was leaving something like Saturday Night Live and all that to go and do this, having done The Young Ones and having had the sort of career that Paul's had and made some of the best decisions in TV that Paul had, I thought, if I can just get on his shirt tails and I can maybe surf along in the glory, do you know what I mean? And that I'm being genuinely honest now.
If my memory serves me correctly, which it probably doesn't, is that Series 1 never happened initially. There was a strike.
We were all aware, as BBC staff members, that there was a dispute in the offing, and indeed that boiled over, and industrial action was taken by the electricians that pretty well brought the whole of the BBC right across the country to a standstill.
So each week we were kind of waiting to be told if the studio would be crewed up and manned or not. And we did a couple of weeks of rehearsing the first episode and getting stood down on the Thursday of the weekend or whatever. So we started then rehearsing the second and the third each week to go in and make that one each week. And in the end, I think I'm right in saying we rehearsed all 6. Never shot one of them.
It was stopped as far as the camera was concerned. In every other respect, it was still going on. We had to work it that way in case the strike was turned off.
The electricians just walked out. So we tried shooting it by everybody lighting matches. That wasn't involved in the actual shot. If you weren't actually in the scene, you'd light matches and hold them until they burned out and everything.
Every week we would say, well, we can record 2 at the end, or we'll do bits of them. But we got halfway through and we thought, there's no way of catching this up. And we honestly thought that was probably it.
I've just got my first TV series, and 6 weeks later, I haven't filmed a frame of comedy. So I thought this was it, devastating.
I thought, that's my higher power. That's a sign from above that this was an absolute turkey. Get yourself out of the wreckage straight away.
But the good thing was we'd done enough of it, and, other people, Peter and other bosses from the BBC had been in and seen it in the rehearsal room. And I think people more and more started to get it.
Then we got another phone call from Paul saying, no, we're going to remount.
We shot the thing, and the rest is history. Well, I mean, what's history really is like Runnybrook and, the Magna Carta and stuff. It doesn't compare to that.
Alexandra Pig was the first Kachansky, but because of a strike, by the time we actually came to make Red Dwarf, she wasn't free anymore. She was hot in a showbiz way because she'd been in Letter to Brezhnev, so she'd been in a movie. Ugh, sexy.
Strong, striking woman to play Kachansky, and that's how I always saw the role. So whoever played Kachansky was never the Kachansky that I'd envisaged.
The reason we got Claire Grogan is because she was feisty and funny, but she wasn't a stand-up comedian who everybody had seen, but she was in a very successful movie, Gregory's Girl, and she was also in a band.
The way we'd originally conceptualised the arc with Lister and Kachansky was that we'd probably bring Kachansky back. But again, we were limited with what was working and what was not working. And Craig, certainly at the time, did not appear that he could be a kind of romantic lead.
I made a terrible cock-up. I'm going to own up to this, probably for the first time. Claire Grogan played Kochanski, and there was 2 Claire Grogans in Spotlight. And I thought, well, it's a 50-50 chance, because the photographs were similar, and I found out the wrong one. And the wrong Claire Grogan was about to get on to a train to come up to be interviewed by me in Manchester, because I was in a production office there at the time. And I thought, I just double-check this. So I phoned the agent. I went, "You're Claire Grogan. Of course, she was in Gregory's Girl, wasn't she?" "No, that's the other one." People were dispatched. There were no mobiles then. People were dispatched to stop her getting on the train. I'm very sorry, other Claire Grogan.
Ed Byer had worked with us on several shows. He'd just, I think, come off 3 of a Kind we'd done together.
Well, I think everyone responded quite positively because, you know, he'd been schooled by Paul Jackson.
Paul is the kind of guy, if he likes you and you don't let him down, he'll stick with you. He's a stick-with-you kind of guy. And so he said, you know, I want Ed to do this. And we said, well, we know Ed, we like him a lot. He's a great bloke to have a drink with. Don't know if he can direct. Great, let's have him.
He actually got it with a passion. I mean, he really, from day one, loved the project and begged us, really. Said, look, Paul, please let me work on this. Please let me do this.
He wasn't anything like BBC directors of the day that I'd come across.
It's a very difficult balance. You have to strike when you're a director. You have to get on with people, but you have to be the boss. And Ed was great at that, because it wasn't an easy group of actors to get on with and be the boss.
The great thing about Ed was when you said something, you know, something you didn't quite like, his eyes would look above your head. They wouldn't look at your eyes. They'd look at your... So he'd sort of say, I think there is a reason for doing that, but maybe not here.
He used to do this a lot. He used to go around and looking at the shot. He'd go around like that. He did it a lot. He did it in his lunch break as well, looking at shots, the lady serving, you know, oh, that's a good shot, that made a good shot.
Ed and Paul Jackson were obviously the good cop, bad cop, you know. Ed is kind of a tall, gangly, naturally funny, likeable, kind of sort of amenable kind of chap, do you know what I mean? He'll sort of cajole and coerce and try and get the best out of you like that. Was Paul coming and go, do it now!
I was working in this area with these new young comics, and so I was kind of the grown-up, and I was so not ready to be a grown-up. I can't remember, I was 30-something maybe. And so I'd be there at 3 o'clock in the morning in the curry house with the lager going down, and then I had to get it together. So when it was 8 o'clock and time to turn over and somebody hadn't turned up yet, or the location wasn't properly set up, that was quite serious for me, except I'd have as bad a hangover as everybody else. George, sorry to be stupid. Why aren't the scutters just here anyway? Is it really essential that they have to be...
Well, the idea was that they came in with...
Yeah, but it's not working, is it? We don't see them. Can't they just be here all along anyway? I mean, we're not seeing them that they're following Lister in anyway.
Yeah, he's just saying he's going to pick it up. Where from, Ed?
That was great. That was great. That was dead right.
There's this great myth that, you know, he puts the fear of God into people, you know, as a producer-director and, you know, top man in terms of producing television shows. And people who say that are absolutely right.
But that's quite good, because you've got that in the background, you know. When all else fails, light blue touch paper and watch him fly.
I was young. I was successful. I had all this money. I had all these experiences that I felt I needed to experience, you know, and a lot of them keep you up late. Do you know what I mean? In fact, a lot of them mean you don't go to bed at all.
They were quite a difficult cast to manage. I mean, you had some characters here. So, yeah, we did slightly play it. I would lay the law down, and then Ed would say, look, don't piss him off, because we're just all going to have a terrible day if you wind him up. Please turn up on time tomorrow, because, you know, I get it in the ear from him if he's in a bad mood. So can we just all try a bit harder?
You can't camera block if your cast is still asleep in bed. And that's why Paul went mad at Craig that time.
I genuinely was angry. I was pacing around. You've got a crew standing there, you know, and I mean, it's discourteous, and it costs money. And you've got the rest of the cast, and they're all beginning to... They want to see, is he going to get away with this? Because maybe if he gets away with it, then why should we any of us turn up? So I had to make a bit of a thing, but I didn't want to do it in front of everybody, so I went out and waited for him on the steps of the building.
Car pulled up outside the BBC and Paul was pacing.
Paul Jackson grabs him by the T-shape.
his lapels were sort of drawn above his head. And he went like that, and the T-shirt came away in his hand. He's left holding this T-shirt that he's just ripped from my body, like, and I'm like, and that kind of did diffuse that situation a little bit. He had to laugh.
Just think, it's only 25 years ago. I mean, you couldn't do that today, could you? Can you imagine what would happen today? I'd be on an anger management course, a reprimand, you know, there'd have been police called in. Thank God there wasn't.
But he was brilliant. I think he's great, absolutely great. He knows everybody, right down to the cleaner. And it'd be 4 or 5 years later, and he'd still know their names. He's very tolerant. He's very helpful and patient.
To try and drag us all in the right direction, it must have been like pushing a Rolls Royce uphill with the handbrake on. And we kind of needed sort of that rod of iron that Paul Jackson was, really. I don't think BBC Manchester was quite ready for Red Dwarf, you know, and science fiction. We were working in a studio which did one other TV show, which was Question of Sport.
I remember a makeup lady we had, didn't like her at all. She was a stuck-up. She was very stuck-up. And she was doing my makeup. She said, I don't know who any of you are. She said, I never watched television.
Another thing that always reminds me of the early series of Red Dwarf would be this. Would be that. Can we go again? Booming shot. Always. Absolutely always. In the middle of your best work as well.
We got into Manchester because we couldn't get into London, and we used the people who were available because we had to.
In those days at the BBC, to a certain degree, you were allocated people. You know, you had a programme and people were allocated.
Now, as it turned out, eventually, you know, some good people came to the surface, but initially it was, you know, these weren't people who were interested in doing anything like Red Dwarf. They weren't excited by it. It wasn't their forte.
Once a month you had schedules meetings where the boss went and got the list of programmes, and he came back and said, we've got this programme called Red Dwarf. It's some sort of science fiction show. I don't want to do it. And the other guy didn't want to do it, and I was a junior. And they just said, you're doing it.
Ed Bowie gave me a tape of Dark Star. And it's, as far as I was concerned, it just had the right feel for two men alone in space.
We thought we'd make it easy, so we'd all be on the same page, and we said, make it submarine-like.
I always remember when I was a small boy, I was at a boarding school. This was during the war, and everything was dark. The towns were dark, the roads were dark, including especially in the country. And all you'd hear was sort of a hiss from a gaslight. And somehow that I remembered that. And I just wanted this feeling of isolation and dark, of shades of grey.
I think Ed treated it maybe like he'd treated other shows and just expected the set to show up. And you needed to be there much more going, hang on, this needs dressing, this needs that, this looks like wood, blah, blah, blah. But by the time it was up, we were there ready to shoot, and there was no time.
We had our Starfield and whatever, although there were really Christmas tree lights, and they failed with about an hour to go on the very first show, and they were all in series, and there was sort of 200 or 300 of them, and we had no chance of finding out which one had gone. So we had to go to plan B, which is get a bit of black drapes, punch holes in it, put a piece of white card behind it and backlight it, and which is why the stars never move. They don't even twinkle.
We kind of thought that everything would kind of take care of itself, and it doesn't. I remember Doug having us all racing around on the night of the first recording. I think the pre-VT, actually, it was before the audience were in, getting coloured chairs from the canteen in the Beeb just to get a bit of colour in.
Rob and Doug are very, very hands-on as writers. Again, much more common now. It wasn't so common then. The old style, literally, you know, a writer would write a script, send them into a producer, and probably not see them until they went out on air, literally in some occasions.
It was very much at the beginning, don't say too much. You can make so many points, and you have to be right every time. And then, of course, as the weeks passed, you know, you built people trusted you, and then you could do more and more and more. But in those early days, it was very much gently.
The writers would say to me, Donna, can you help us and go out doing a bit of shopping? So I used to go out after the read-through. We'd do a block and I'd go out shopping to get little bits and pieces to add just a bit of colour to the set. And I had to do it in secret because I didn't want to offend Paul. And I think there was one point where I think Paul nearly caught me because I was in the camera room taking out camera cable like this. And all of a sudden Paul came up to me with his pipe and just stepped over. What are you doing, Donna? I said, oh, nothing, just tidying the cable up because it's a bit messy. OK, and he walked off and I couldn't believe it. I was carrying on, throwing it onto the set and walking off.
The people would come from Manchester, from everywhere, and we'd rehearse it with like little lines on the floor to denote what rooms we were in and stuff like that. And we'd do a full dress rehearsal and they'd be writing things down, and you'd have John Pomfrey there going, yeah, we're going to need a blonde there, we're going to need a bit of a red head.
You take copious notes, masses of notes, and draw little heads on the plan and whatever, and then go back to Manchester. I would then sit down at a drawing board and create a lighting plot.
And it was terrible, you know, if you were rehearsing that in front of people and they were like, you know, that was your reaction to it. And you're like, this is a comedy. Oh, God, we're going to die on Saturday. We're going to die on Saturday. It's all going to be pants. Because they weren't great audiences, you know. But then again, they were doing their jobs, you know what I mean? They weren't concentrating on that. They were probably thinking, how am I going to get a light there? Or, you know, am I going to get the boom in there?
We'd rehearse an acton. And then I think it was on the last day of rehearsals, we'd all get on a coach. And the coach would drive us up to Manchester. And then we'd get off at Manchester, go into the hotel, do the 2-day shooting, following day, back in the coach, back down, rehearsals. It was weird.
Manchester every weekend, staying at this hotel, which I won't name, that I didn't like at all.
It had curtains, and you'd open them up, the curtains, and there'd be no window there. It was just some curtains put on the wall.
You know, a traditional big old, you know, truck of a Victorian-type hotel.
I was there once, and the ceiling fell in on me while I was asleep. I woke up and the ceiling had actually plaster had collapsed on my head.
This original hotel had sort of people of the night knocking on the door, you know, making offers.
A particular activity that I have to say we did not get involved with.
Hello, would you like company for the evening? You're going, what do you mean? And then you realise who this plump Mancunian girl, what she was and why she was there. God knows.
It didn't happen to me, but it happened to several people, and so we had to move from that hotel. I remember that.
Yeah, so we moved on to the Midland, much classier, thank you very much. Had windows.
Good morning, Dave. It is now safe for you to emerge from stasis.
I've only just got in.
Please proceed to the drive room for debriefing.
We spent a lot of time planning things that were actually really important, as it turned out in the end. Like what the show looks like and how you even start it. What are the titles like?
The original idea was to start on Craig Charles painting the letter F, as it turned out. We chose the letter F because it was a convenient shape and we could fit the rear projection screen in quite easily. The idea was you'd start on a close-up of his paintbrush, pull back to reveal him in his spacesuit.
And you pull out and you pull out and you pull out. You just keep pulling out, all one shot, until you've got the whole spaceship. And it was going to kind of go like that, and it was all going to be one shot. But we couldn't really get it to work like that.
The problem was mixing from the letter F on the Red Dwarf logo, which was built about 3 feet high. We then had to match that to the letter F on the main model, which was only about 2 inches high. And the difference was too big. What we needed was an intermediate stage as well.
You can get around all this now, but those days it was like, you're mad, it'll never work.
I think because he was a hologram, Rimmer, that there was a bit of a debate early on as to how this was going to be, you know, manifested on me as an actor.
No, I mean being a hologram. Do you mind? No, I mean being a hologram.
Do you mind?
At one stage, I was going to paint Chris completely blue. Oh, what I was going to do is key monochrome back into him, yeah. So he would be black and white. Didn't work. Anyway, by the time you finished editing on 1-inch tapes and you'd gone down to your 58th billionth generation, stuff started to look black and white anyway.
A show always brings a little bit of friends and family to it. But of course we were in Manchester, so not quite so much. I mean, there was numerous girls who'd been in the Hacienda the previous night coming in on Craig and Danny's tickets, obviously.
I think it was about 20% full. And I went out of the building and across the road to the pub, begging people to come across, to come in and see this show. And in fact, got half the pub.
Well, with the first episode, as anticipated, not that many people laughed at what they saw because that's not actually true, actually. They did laugh at what they saw, but we didn't have enough jokes in it, so we went back and put more jokes in.
The parts where Rob and Doug had laughed and Paul Jackson had laughed in the rehearsals, you're expecting laughter. And of course, when it's not howling back, you're beginning to think, I'm doing something wrong. I'm useless.
OK, Modo, spell orbit. I've seen your report. You cannot spell orbit. O-R-B-I-T. That is how you spell orbit?
You just had to keep mentioning to yourself that this is the first time that anyone's seeing this. And, people aren't going to laugh immediately at it. It'll take a while to sort of bed in, It's a TV program. Think about the audience who are going to see it at home.
There was no pilot made, which is a huge disadvantage because the great thing you want to do with a pilot is see what works, see what doesn't work, then go away and then rewrite all the scripts and work them based on what you've learned in the pilot.
I remember at the end of the show, me saying, I got what I wanted out of that. And in the back of my mind, I was going, no, I didn't.
The first episodes are always hard because you've got so many things to establish that you don't know, never mind that you've got to tell the audience. And secondly, with sitcom, you've got to lay pipe, but you've got to get laughs just like on an ordinary show. You can't say to people, just watch the first episode so you know who everybody is, and then the comedy will come next week. You've got to get laughs as well.
You've lived with the script for so long that you're very reluctant to change any of it, and really probably most of it needs changing. We could see, as we were rehearsing it, that there were flat areas and it wasn't funny enough, and there were all kinds of things wrong with it. But we couldn't sort of bring ourselves to do anything about it until it was far too late.
And I think until it went out in front of the audience and got very, very little, that no one was really listening. And in fact, I remember the second show, and Paul gathered Rob and I together, and he said, I've got one note to give you. And I said, more jokes. And he said, yeah, more jokes.
At the end of the recording of the first series, we had a spare recording date, including a day's pre-VT, so we could do a whole another show.
And I knew it was there. And I think I maybe even discussed with him and say, we might have to do a 7th script. And that actually wasn't really very practical. So we devised this rather cunning plan of using that last week to go back and do pickups for the rest of the series. And again, because the BBC had worked in these blocks and kind of then didn't really monitor it very carefully, nobody noticed, in effect. We just delivered 6.
4th engineer, Grace Allender. I never knew you, Grace. I'm really sorry you're dead.
That scene where I was acting so terribly crappily, my timing was just all to pieces, really. It didn't really help the pathos of the situation when you're surrounded by little plastic swivel bins and things like that, which keep going, swinging backwards and forwards, and it's so obvious it's like a kitchen bin.
And I think it might have partially been my fault, because then in those days I thought, well, swing bin, that's kind of cool. We'll put the canisters in a swing bin. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? No, actually, it's not amazing at all. It's stupid.
We really liked that scene. I remember I particularly was fond of it because it was kind of poignant, and you didn't really need poignant. I think what you needed to do was make bloody people laugh and so they'd tune in next week. So we lost it, and it was better for it.
Todd Hunter, yeah. Oh, he was great. Yeah, he was really good. He put a bet on a horse called Holly, £1, and he gave me the ticket. And I'd never met him in my life. Well, I'd met him once before, He didn't win though, so he's all right.
See, although you are still a mass, you are no longer an event. Although you are still a mass, you are no longer an event. You are no longer an event in space-time. You are a non-event in time. You see? And you have a quantum probability of 0. You are no longer a mass in time. You've got to look at the... this is gobbledygook. This is gobbledygook.
Robert did actually only get that speech this morning to learn. That's true. So what a bugger to give somebody a speech like that to learn.
He took no great pleasure in getting it wrong. I suppose he was much more of an actor as opposed to an entertainer. And you know, we found it entertaining to get it wrong and come across as like we don't know what we're doing.
She still went to bed with me.
Yeah, because she had wonky vision. She thought you were some...
Take a breath, Chucks. Stomach back anywhere, Chucks.
She still went to bed with me.
Yeah, because she had wonky vision and she thought you were somebody else.
Oh, God.
We wanted Mac because we wanted somebody who was funny and American. And in those days, there was only about 3 who lived in the country.
You know, a little nibble here and a little nibble there, Lister, and before you know it, we're flying backwards.
The first choice for Hollister, I was told, was Dame Edith Evans. And she was working, and she was very frail at the time. And those factors combined to her saying no to it. And then they decided to go with Stephen Burkoff. And he was doing a play in the West End. And then they got this idea to go American with it. And you know that guy in Malcolm in the Middle that plays Malcolm? Well, he wasn't born yet, and so there's no point in going with him. In the end, I got it because I was the only guy that could fit the fat suit.
I knew Mac from the days of performing on the circuit, you know, which I used to do, and he used to be the singing jukebox in Covent Garden.
I did an act with a loaf of Mother's Pride bread and a pot of yogurt, showing people how they could use them to make party costumes and nuclear Holocaust protection units and stuff like that. And so we all came out of that same stable.
What are future echoes?
How simple do you want this?
So Lister can understand it.
Oh dear.
Future Echoes was actually the 5th show we wrote. We'd written this series with this kind of axe over our heads. We weren't supposed to make it science fiction-y.
It was heavy on science fiction, but actually it was such a well-told story that it was fine, and it was a good end. It was a good, clever end that nobody could have guessed.
It was very difficult plotting it. It was a great deal of fun sort of writing this scene where Rimmer plays the same dialogue twice. I enjoyed that.
But to rehearse, it was quite difficult because I had to work out how to intone the lines the first time. Because if you're doing them with the wrong lines coming back at you, it can sound different and wrong compared to what they should sound like. I'm not making myself very clear, actually, so I think you should just show them the scene.
I've decided when you go into stasis, I want to stay behind. I want to be left on.
What, on your own for the rest of your life?
What things? Eh? I said what?
What's going on?
Great scene. Absolutely brilliant scene. That's when, for me, it's sort of thing, hey, this is getting really clever now. And funny. And I think I'm a bit more comfortable with the acting. Also, still not great, but a bit more comfortable with it.
It's quite tricky to rehearse somebody being themselves twice in the same scene. This is you being number 1 and you run in and do this. And this is you being number 2, you run in and do this. Trust me, it'll work.
In position.
It's really freaky, isn't it? Ah! Rimmer! I've just seen you walk out of that door.
What?
You get to a point when you're doing sitcoms that you can just organically know when you've got a good show. And Future Echoes was a good show. The audience reacted really well, but they reacted really well for a reason. It was a good show.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. That's actually the end of that episode. As you can see, the credits will roll over that Polaroid. Thank you for being such a fantastic audience. That is the best audience we've had in the 4 shows so far. Or maybe it's the best show, I don't know. But anyway, it's got the best response.
This was you aged 171, Dave.
That was really cool. I was in makeup for days. And, yeah, because they sort of aged me with, I think it was latex, I think. I don't know if we'd reached latex yet. It was probably paper mache.
We had to think of what Lister would be in, 100 and whatever it is years. We wanted to leave a positive message that, he'd lived an adventurous and exciting life and things had happened. It was kind of like a trailer for, stay tuned to this series because, it gets better. It was sort of like that. So we gave him a robot arm and things so that he looked like he'd lived through it.
Lister's space bike. Yes, that was a Sinclair C5, and we removed the bodywork from it, and we placed a pair of drop handlebars on it, and we dressed it in the finest BBC Visual Effects Department style with silver tape and spray paint. It would do 15 miles an hour or so, and in a tight little studio, that was pretty quick.
Because it was like a really cool machine, and it was great for going down corridors and all that. Because I remember at the top, Red Dwarf was supposed to be 15 miles long, and, you wouldn't walk it.
I'll try my best, George. It's just that it's a bit tight there.
Craig, actually, to his credit, was pretty good. He would hack round corners and then stop and then hack round the same corner again, and we'd try and take a different angle to make it look like there were lots of corridors, because we wanted to make Red Dwarf appear to be big.
The Red Dwarf model, the original model, was built by Derek Hendon, and they were a company that did bits and pieces of model making for the BBC over the years. I
said, it's not going to be one of those spaceship shows where you're racing around shooting Klingons. And the ship can be a big, bulky mess of a thing. It's a mining ship, and it can have, a huge meteor in the side of it that they're mining as they move along.
Well, we were trying to make it so that it was self-regenerative, so that the scoop would collect debris as a form of power source. But also, if you had this big rock in the side, you were mining that rock and using that rock as power to make the ship go.
Peter Wragg did a rough sketch on a bit of paper and passed it on to Derek, and Derek built what his interpretation of that sketch.
I mean, I love the ship, but we didn't mean it to be red. And so we saw this, and we said, what? It's red. It's called Red Dwarf. And so I was a bit, oh my God, what have we done? What have we done?
When the model turned up, it was essentially a giant red brick originally. It was going to be maybe a long ship with interesting jutting out bits. It turns up as a big squat thing.
We went away and thought about it and chatted it over, saying, can we live with this? Will they respray it? And we got used to it and thought, well, actually, sod it, yeah, let's do it. It's different and it's unique.
The main problem for me was that there wasn't really anything particularly interesting sticking out of the ship so that we could get the camera through to create a real sense of size, because it was meant to be something like 5 miles long. So it became a more tricky shoot than I'd envisaged. The Red Dwarf spaceship approaches camera, and then the camera sinks below it and it trundles overhead. Unfortunately, the model hadn't been built for that. It had no underside details. So we had a couple of guys from BBC Visual Effects, Tony Auger and Martin Geeson, who had to go out to, I think they went to Hamleys and bought a load of extra model kits and stuck them on and then sprayed them, which is why the underside looks a slightly different colour to the rest of the ship, because it wasn't obviously sprayed with the same paint.
I was comparing at a comedy club called Jongleurs in London, and I was approached by a very tall man when I was having a drink in the interval, and he said, have you ever done a warm-up for a TV show? And I said, no. And he said, you'd be good at it. Do you fancy doing one? We're doing this new show called Red Dwarf. And that was Ed By.
Sexiest? Okay, here we go. This is my sexiest fake, Steve.
And what he used to do was do competitions with the audience and give them bits of wood as prizes.
In our show, if the warm-up guy wasn't good, the guys were merciless because they did stand up, so they were merciless. And Craig was known to take the microphone and tell a few gags So Tony was the only one he never did it to because he had his own style and he was funny anyway.
Well, we don't have time to do a warm-up, so, well, I'll just...
Eddie is hard with the warm-up for us, and we sacked him. Do you know what I mean? He just didn't get any laughs. You haven't got time to do the concepts that Eddie sort of tries to weave on stage in a warm-up slot, you know.
Oh, no, it's not.
A little bit of a showbiz discussion here, really. I'm in room 461. That sort of thing.
He just did lots of small roles. He was a voiceover of a vending machine. He had a banana bomb. He was Caligula.
It was very much like a team. And even as the person that does the warm-up, who's normally just feels very outside it all, they were very good at including me in and making me feel part of it.
You know, we used to get back to the hotel and he'd play that, you know, that Les Dawson piano where he'd play the wrong notes. And so there'd be sort of a bar mitzvah going on in the hotel or something, and then Tony Hawk's would be playing da 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 dee da da ding da, ding dong.
It was great to watch people wince as they were trying to check in. Jesus, who hired that man?
What's this? Learning drugs? They're illegal, matey. I'm afraid you're in very serious, grave, deep trouble, Lister. Where did you get them? I want names, I want places, I want dates.
Arnold Rimmer, his locker, this morning.
It's one thing to write a pilot and people go, well, what happens in future episodes? And you go, oh, well, they'll have all sorts of adventures, they'll be travelling through space and just amazing things will happen. And people go, oh, okay, fine. And then when you actually get the commission and you think, hang on, we've killed all humans off, we've got this no alien rule, no monsters rule, what are we going to do?
We did the flashback partly to open it up a bit because it was getting a bit claustrophobic. I mean, it was a prison with not even any guards in it.
But I do remember thinking the show would be much better if we brought these guys in all the time. How are we going to sustain me, Rimmer, Holly, and the cat for any length of time?
And we also thought, you know, in a science fiction-y kind of way, you can get back to the original cast. And I think we had it in mind that we might do that quite a lot.
Craig had a habit of smoking the props, so that by the time he came to do the scene, he'd go in, the box would be there. Donna, where's the cigarettes? And I got fed up with this because it looked like it was me that I'd forgotten to give him the props. And then he comes up with I think it was him that came up with the idea of putting the cigarettes in his hat. Helen would come and go, can I have a cigarette? A packet of cigarettes. I said, why? Oh, Craig wants a cigarette. I said, tell him, Craig, there's the shops outside. Go. And she'd go off.
Candy, Denmark forever. Is this Peterson's arm, Holly?
Coming out of makeup with two completely different arms, one of which, of course, was Peterson's arm, and behaved like Peterson's arm, was incredibly odd.
Tell him to stop it! What is this? Cabaret? Entertainment while you eat?
I'm sure even at drama school they don't say, right, there you are, one arm is yours and the other arm isn't. The other arm belongs to someone who hates your guts. How's it going to perform?
I'll have you know I chose this face out of the billions available because it happened to be the face of the greatest and most prolific lover who ever lived.
Rob and Doug and I had made a decision that it would be better to see Norman rather than just hear him because he's got a great lugubrious face.
Initially, the money was low because it was a voiceover, so they can get away with paying you peanuts for that.
Norman had been banging on right from the start. He's saying, get my face on screen. That's the money.
So I kept moaning and whinging about this. I said, why have I got to do a voiceover in a TV show? Why can't you see this face? And why can't this computer called Holly look like this bloke here? By the time we'd recorded the third episode of the first series, it had been agreed that we would see Holly and we'd go and reshoot some of the bits for the first and second and third episodes.
With Norman, what we had to do is suddenly had to find a position, as he was envisioned, where we could get a camera. We couldn't dedicate one camera to him all the time. So cameras had to get in and out, and he had to be in a black area. We crushed the pictures very slightly to lose all the blacks and pushed the signal through a clipper keying system which broke up his face slightly.
They thought a computer, oh yeah, well it won't have a normal face, will it? It'll be pixelated. And I think they also wanted to do something with the voice, making it a bit, I don't know, Doctor Who-ish, like a Dalek. I don't know what they had in mind, putting some echo on it. Ed wanted to put some echo on it, reverb on it. And I said, no, that defeats the whole thing. Have it as me, just me, I'm the computer.
The original requirement for the scutters was that they should be a shoebox-sized device with an arm coming out of the top of it. I think I was given originally 2 weeks to build them in, but they actually took nearer 3 months. And that was only possible because of the strike.
And these are remote-controlled robots, which again, in those days was quite unusual. It was still things that people went, ooh, at it on Tomorrow's World.
I'm convinced that Peter Ragg was the only one in the studio who really believed in their ability to perform well.
It was made of such scrap iron that every time we operated them, the radio control was interfered with by all the moving metal. So you would tell it to go, and you were unable to tell it not to go afterwards because it would just go all over the place. And there was one notorious occasion where Chris Barry and Craig Charles had just been dealing with them. And just as the word cut was uttered from the gallery, the head simply fell off one of these cutters.
And I seem to remember Craig one day coming in and saying, what are we doing now, man? And I said, I think we're doing a scene with the scutters. They went, the scutters? I've got time for a fag.
Bastards. Bastards. Now, if we'd done Red Dwarf after we'd done Robot Wars, the scutters would have been fantastic.
Down, slowly. Aha! Now very, very, very slowly forward.
Ow, me eye!
They really, they could grip, but they could only grip in a most light way. And even if they did grip something, the radio interference would simply mean that they would twitch and drop whatever it was that they had succeeded in gripping. And of course, we also had a glove puppet scutter for the more refined movements.
Radio control technology was not very advanced, and to try and make a scooter go in a straight line, just forget it. Driving into furniture, a bit like me in the dress rehearsal, really.
The scutters were named. They had a 2-storey house on wheels with a loft space where all their controls were hidden, and the batteries and the chargers and all the bits and pieces that went with them. And the box was blazoned with a little brass plaque that announced that Mercedes and Benz lived inside.
I am your God. Okay. Turn this into a woman.
To be frank, Waiting for God is my least favourite of all the Red Dwarf shows. I haven't watched it in a good many years, and I really got no plans to in the future, just because, we were struggling at the time, I think, to find... you always do this with the show, to find out where the heart of the show is, to where the meat and potatoes of it are. And we were sort of very much at the time wrapped up in the mythos that we'd created from the pilot. And we were sort of exploring that, and mercifully we managed to give that up in the following episode and get on with the thing.
My science fiction knowledge was all movie-based, and Rob was much more TV and literature-based. So Rob felt it was very important that we did the whole backstory of the cats, because that's what you would have done in a novel.
When I heard, it's going to be the cat episode, I was kind of expecting more. I think that they could have pushed the boat out more as far as making the cat episode as big as the cat character.
The idea was very appealing, which was, here is this very, very ordinary, ungodlike guy who discovers he is this dying guy's god and then behaves like his god on his deathbed. And it seemed like a really smart idea. Not funny, but just a great idea. And that's why we went for it. And then, of course, as soon as you get into it, it was just turgid and difficult. And you've got the golden donut and all that stuff that just looked terrible.
When you write, you go into the bells of the ship, you imagine this kind of alien movie, huge chamber. And, you get a stock room with some cobwebs in it.
Oh, I loved that set. It was a disused cargo area. I liked it. It was so dusty and grotty. It was lovely.
I mean, the spaceship was supposed to be huge. The visuals at the start of the show showed a whopping great spaceship, and the set wasn't that big, and it was, especially the studio, it was quite a small studio in Manchester. So by giving you spots of light and pools of darkness, you let the brain work and pretend it's further and bigger, and the colours were just random colours, just to break it up.
Noel Coleman, because I remember him from black and white war movies and things like that. He was an old sort of big old 50s screen idol. But he was knocking on. And to be fair to him, couldn't remember a blasted thing.
Well-respected English actor who prided himself on knowing his lines, and then we changed them all at the last minute to make his life hell.
Stubbleless, suppleless.
Sloppy.
Slobby.
Slobby.
Slobby. Slobbiness, for God's sake, whatever that may mean, slobbiness. All these years I kept the faith. I wore the holy custard stain and the sacred gravy mark. I renounced coolness and chose the righteous path of stubbleless.
And then it was terrible, because he had this big silly hat on, didn't he? And he had to fall on the bed and die, and the hat bumped and cracked the bridge of his nose, and the bridge of his nose was all bleeding and all that. But do you notice about Noel? He had different coloured hands, because he was a cat, so you see. I wonder how many nipples he had.
I always wanted to see a scene where you saw loads of cats, so you didn't have to sort of try and tell the story through one cat. 2 arcs flew off, one lot are out there somewhere, and I always wanted them to find that arc. That would have been the cat episode.
Of course, it's safe. Come in. Come on, come in.
Don't ask me how I learned to do that. Don't even ask me how I found out I could do it. It's just, why? And when I fall down, you can see this big trail of spit.
We got that from rehearsals. There was a door in the rehearsal room which had a bit of glass in it. And he would go outside the door and go, here, watch this, and do that. And we went, and so in it went.
They must have looked something like a roast chicken. It's the bloody garbage pod. Why didn't you tell me, Lister? It's the garbage pod!
I got hired to do the warm-up for Red Dwarf. And when I came in to talk to them, they said, and we got a part for you.
Oh, you're not busy eating toast, are ya?
And I did a reading, and I did it really deadpan, want some toast? Really deadpan. And I just completely cracked everybody up. And then the strike happened. And then by the time it all came around again, they called me up and they said, come and do the warm-up. By that time, I had decided as a career move that I wouldn't do warm-ups anymore, because you're kind of always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But they still let me do the toaster. And I think that they got Tony Hawks to be the warm-up man.
I didn't like the toaster because I saw him as a threat. I saw him as competition. Hello, someone's doing jokes as well as me. A bloody toaster. I'm the computer. I'm the funny one in that area. Get out of here.
During the course of rehearsals, I had this really deadpan thing. Somebody, and I can't imagine why anybody would ever think this, somebody came in and said, I think he sounds a lot like Norman. And I thought, wow. So that's when they put this computerized voice on top of the whole thing.
I also built for it a little sound to light unit, which was a microphone and a little circuit that was strapped to the voiceover artist's microphone on the side of the stage. And so when he spoke his lines, my little microphone would pick it up and flash the light in the toaster.
One of my favorite days ever was my first day. I showed up at this Red Dwarf, and I didn't know anybody. I knew Norman. I had worked in a comedy club with Norman. And I showed up, and people didn't pay much attention to me. There were people working hard, and so I was just the toaster, you know. And we went for lunch, and I kind of sat at the end of this table, and I was kind of sitting by myself, and all of a sudden, every famous person I ever worked with walked in the door. Rory Bremner walked in. Ronnie Corbett walked in, who I'd been on tour with Ronnie Corbett years ago. Paul Daniels, Ali Bongo, they all came over, sat around me. Lenny Henry and Robbie Coltrane, who I'd never met, but so all of a sudden, and everyone was over there going, who the hell is this toaster guy? And they were the only famous people I knew, and they were all in that room. And so after lunch, man, I got a lot more respect.
You're my confidence. I'm all the things you associate with confidence, King. You're my paranoia.
Isn't that a urine stain on the front of your trousers?
I mean, Rob was right in terms of not meeting an alien of the week or a monster of the week or landing on a planet, is that it would force us to come up with something original. And what it forced us to do was, instead of looking outward, it made us look inward into the characters.
We're both fascinated by psychology and what makes us all tick, and we both nearly did it at university. I say nearly, we actually went and were supposed to be doing it. But that we were very interested in that kind of thing. Confidence and paranoia kind of did tap into a theme we were going to go back to, though we didn't know it, of the psyche made real.
You can do anything. Anything.
I think Paul Jackson recommended Craig Ferguson. I didn't know him.
When I say nobody calls me faggot, Craig calls me faggot.
Craig was a very confident person, you know, he was right for that role. He was great.
He is confident, he is energetic, he's big, he's happy.
Apart from an actor, he's a stand-up comedian, very good one, with that kind of Scottish bigness. Not bigness in size, but in performance.
Oh, look! You've got a body like a coat hanger. How can you make an evening suit shit? How can I make an evening suit shit?
Why do Scottish people do brilliant American accents? But have you noticed that? Scottish people do brilliant American accents.
There was a couple of people we auditioned for that part, and one of them was Mac McDonald. But we thought Mac would have been a great confidence, but we didn't want to lose him as the captain. So maybe at one stage, Craig Ferguson could have become the captain, who knows?
Again, like Craig Ferguson for confidence, for paranoia, Lee was absolutely perfect. You know, if anyone's going to remind you of that spot you have, you know, it's just that character.
Lee, I knew a lot, was a great friend. He'd been in The Young Ones, and also he did the warm-up in The Young Ones, and he was fantastic.
Lee Corn's another person on the circuit, comedian, who was in a group called The Wow Show. He was right for playing miserable, you know, paranoid people. It was perfect.
That's me. That's how I was. Yes, that's right. He was the opposite of Craig. Healthy, you know, white teeth, tan, larger than life, and this guy was sort of just really into himself and nasty and creepy. And again, typecasting, I dare say.
His whole comic being, if you like, is sort of trades on being a small man.
He used to host the Comedy Store, and he played a character where he would come on as a sort of rather unpleasant MC, and as the show went on, he would come with more and more damage done to him. So the next time he'd introduce would be some blood coming out of his nose, inferring that somebody had smacked him in the face backstage. And by the end of it, he's covered in bruises, there's blood everywhere, and, you know, that's the kind of character he played, where he was just irritating and everybody wanted to beat him senseless.
He was a very serious contender for Rimmer at the time. Not at that time, but obviously when we were casting. And so we were on the lookout for a meaty part for him.
I saw it recently and thought, yeah, you know, quite enjoyed what I did. I mean, I looked so ghastly. I mean, they didn't have to do much makeup on me to make me look sort of that drawn. I thought obviously how young and thin I was, but yeah, I was quite pleased with that. I don't. Sometimes you can look at yourself and go, oh dear, but you know, I was pleased with that.
A gantry was, to say the very least, jury-rigged around that scene, and we quite literally stood up there with buckets of fish that had been bought that day from the fish market, and we left these in the cooling environment of a Manchester studio for most of the day.
So they'd been up there all day and just basically part cooking. So you had this sort of semi-cooked fish smell, which, you know, frozen fish smell is all right. And the cooked fish smell is all right. But the in-between one...
And then I had to take a shot of a live fish on the floor, flapping about, like they do when they're... And I remember taking a shot of it going, I haven't quite got enough. And Paul Jackson, he who is so tough, went, that's enough! Put the fish back in the bucket! Wouldn't have happened with an actor. They'd have been left to flap about until they were dead.
The Mayor of Warsaw spontaneously combusted. This was simply a rollback and mix camera gag.
You do a lock-off. So the guy comes in, he rings the bell, and at the particular point, we cut, ask the man to move, and then you fire off an explosion. You get his clothes, you hang them on a wire, and you drop the clothes. And then always for good measure, you take a shot of the clothes on the floor landing on a heap. And that's how you blow somebody up.
Please note a dust storm is approaching. Ship exterior is now out of bounds. All airlocks are being automatically sealed.
We had to provide a sort of POV shot of the dust storm in space approaching the ship. So at the time, I think we'd been messing around with water tanks for some nuclear explosions for aliens. We'd had a 4-foot square tank made up, which we filled with water. And at the back of the tank, we have a little probe which we squirt Jay's fluid through. And that goes towards lens, and it spreads out through the water and looks like some kind of gas cloud or whatever you like to call it. And then we basically chopped off the back end of the Red Dwarf spaceship and stood it on the floor on its end, and then dropped vermiculite, little particles of mica, lots of dust in it. And as we tracked the camera down, the Red Dwarf spaceship appeared to be flying left to right.
You don't need anything, King. You're the king. You're crazy.
If you're on the outside of Red Dwarf, it's an enormous ship, isn't it? And it's very difficult to give that impression really in the studio. And I sent the buyer out to get some rolls of paper, you know, the big rolls. And I got our painter, Bert, to sort of pour some red paint on.
And you know what? It wasn't grey. It was red, because it was the outside of Red Dwarf. We got away from the grey, and all of a sudden everyone was like, had a song in their heart and a smile on their face.
Paul designed the set against the sound gallery wall, and the stairs that they came down were the actual stairs from the sound gallery.
Of course, the Vision Mixer sort of managed to double that up by pushing a few buttons.
And drop them in on the edit into a bigger shot. And then the close-up was actually done on the studio floor.
Craig Confidence was simply directed to walk along the gallery and position himself in a specific point. And at that point, we could cut and lock off. We then took him out, and it took quite a long time to do this change because we then had to take a panel away and bring an air mortar up behind and charge it and load it with debris and put in an empty spacesuit which was connected to the air mortar. And once everything was ready, we simply rolled the cameras again and fired the button, and everything went bang at the same time.
The secret is to make the explosion happen very, very close to the edit. So you have normal person, explosion straight away afterwards. So you don't see much of the dummy.
And that was a great special effect where he took it, exploded, and I got injured. I got hit by bits of things. So when you see me falling like that, that's because I caught a little bit, you know what I mean? All my own stunts.
The original ending to Confidence and Paranoia was Lister gets Holly to power down unnecessary resources, and he has enough power then to generate another hologram, and it was going to be Kochanski. And it was because it was the sort of the final show of the first season, we thought, oh, well, you know, it's kind of a bit of a cliffhanger. We want people to think what's going to happen next. It was only after the hiatus, and we were sort of sitting in the office talking about the series, and I said, you know what we should have done at the end of that? We should have brought back Rimmer instead. And Doug said, you're right, let's write it. And I was saying, you're mad. We've got 6 shows. We're not going to get paid anymore. Why would we do that? And but we did. And It turns out that knocked out the second show we'd written, which featured 2 listers, but it had the same theme, which is, how would you get on with yourself?
And that new show was Me Squared, which obviously had the benefit of what we'd seen in rehearsals, and I'm sure the shows would have continued to get stronger, and we would have knocked out at least Waiting for God and probably at least one more if we'd had just a few more weeks. But unfortunately, we didn't spend that summer as wisely as we might have done.
Do you honestly think I'd put Kachansky's disc in Kachansky's box where any munchkin could find it? You think you had it bad before, Lister. Now you've got it in stereo, baby. Welcome aboard, Rimsey. A pleasure to be here, you old munchkin, you. Now, we'll do it again, and we'll just saying the line. It's going to be too difficult to do. Everything tickety-boo? Absolutely want, Mr. Rimmer. I'll be along with lickety-split. Carry on. What a guy.
By the end of that first series, Rob and Doug's imagination was on a roll, and I think that was why Me Squared was so important, because within 6.5 hours, they'd learnt and they'd had the confidence to put into action, and they'd got a crew and cast who could deliver. And Me Squared, I think, was a very important step on the way of thinking, we can go anywhere. We actually can do anything we damn well want.
The split screen work in Me Squared was actually some of the most exciting stuff we did.
You rehearse a scene and somebody else plays him, stands in for him. Quite often it'd be me, and then you do the other half and he plays himself, and then I'll be the other half of that, and then sometimes I'd even do that in the studio.
The star jumps together, that was the physically draining part. Having to do, if something goes wrong, you've got to do more takes and more takes on top of that, and it's got to marry in with the other set of star jumps you've already done. So everything was going to be twice.
I think we played him first time round back so that he could see himself on the monitor, so he could catch up with himself doing it.
This is fantastic. This is what I always dreamed of. Shut up.
To do something completely different, which is work with yourself and work to a track that you've already laid down. You really need a director who's completely on top of the game, and Ed Bye on that day was absolutely there with it.
Better watch what you say about my mum.
Now grow up, Mr. Gazpacho!
Right, hold it there, love.
I said, Mr. Gazpacho!
Which I don't need my script in this, do I?
It was interesting. It was hard work. You had to concentrate. You had to sort of stand in the correct position and not lean over like that, which I'd mastered perfectly. It's weird because you're acting against nobody. You're not getting any back. Which happens quite a lot when you're acting with Chris anyway.
We had a lot more scenes in it that were involved 2 rimmers, but Paul took us to one side in his friendly kind of mafia way, said that we better cut out half of them because they were giving Ed too much of a nightmare. He couldn't possibly accomplish it in the time available to him, and we reluctantly did.
Can I do that again?
Paul's firm hold of a rehearsal room was very well demonstrated by his famous Italian runs.
He'd rehearse the half-hour script in 5 minutes. You'd forget the meaning of the line, just line, really fast.
Hence the Italian, it's like...
And it sounds mad when you're doing it, but I tell you what, you bloody know the lines at the end of the day. You can't catch people out because it's, boys are competitive. And it became just like a parlour game, really.
And every time they get it wrong, you make them go back until they get it right. And then, it's a well-known technique. He just happened to do it in the style of a Nazi, that's all.
If you screwed up in any way, whoever screwed up was responsible for us starting from the beginning again. Or it might be, if he's feeling good, it might be just go to the beginning of that scene.
It's just like being back at school. But the headmaster's dropped in, and you've got Ed sitting there sort of going, I told you, you should learn your lines, guys. You're expected to be off the books. And, of course, Paul's sitting there, and the eyes seem to be getting wider, and the lip, he seems to be biting his lip even more firmly. And then, of course, there's the screech of the chair, sometimes flying back at high velocity. And he stands up and says, guys, you've got to learn your lines. You've got to know your lines. And then just when the veins start to sort of push through the neck, then you kind of know you're in trouble.
But I read mine because I was on auto cue anyway.
So when you did have a hangover, or when you did like this weird laugh that came out of nowhere, because you thought, where's the funniness in that bit? That's not funny. What are you laughing for? You couldn't get put off because he was so well versed and so well drilled with the lines.
The speed read was a thing that actually I had learnt from the Manchester crew on Young Ones, Rick, Ben, Aid, so I assume it was a technique they had done there. And I've always liked it, and I've used it throughout. I haven't directed for 10, 12 years now, but I've always liked it as the director.
What it did make you do was concentrate fully on, because it's easy to sort of be doing the run and then sort of, you'll wander off and, oh, that's a nice light.
Often, Danny would have one line, page 17, and they get to page 17, and then Danny would have forgotten his line, and then you'd have to go back to the beginning. And what that promotes is hatred for fellow cast members, rather than, hey, we're really up for this, and we're all lads, and this is a bit of a drinking game.
Danny could do other things apart from act and dance and be funny and be late. There was other things he could do, and one of them was he could roller skate really well.
I was in Starlight Express, did the year on the roller skate, so by then I was like, they were like walking in shoes.
Danny came in, showed us how he could roller skate. The next minute, he's roller skating in a set. Do you know, I think health and safety probably couldn't do that now. You'd probably have to mat in the roller skates later.
Anything where I could show the audience something, unusual that I can add to the character's string of things that he could do. I'd learnt to juggle when I was doing the musical Barnum at the London Palladium. Juggling's quite catty as well. They do that with ping pong balls on the floor.
You can unicycle as well. We haven't used that yet. I couldn't find a point of unicycling, but he can unicycle.
10 3/4 centimetres! Do you know what? Someone had chewed that gum, blown that bubble, then I had to put it in my mouth. Because they tried with me at first. Another skill I was late developing. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't even get a semi-big. I couldn't even get a semi-bubble on. This is a Jordax, by the way.
One of the important things, and Doug stressed this a lot, was we didn't want to make it. We didn't want to make contemporary references because it would date the show, which did mean. Inventing cartoon characters that they could talk about, Muggs Murphy.
Well, we made a bit of a cartoon with Muggs running along shooting things, I think. We had to shoot bits of it so that you see Lister watching clips of it. But with all these things, you can only afford that much. And you could only see that much. So that's how long you had.
Very quiet, please. Recording this time.
If Ed Bye was sharing a room with Ed Bye, yeah, God, I'd hate him. I really wouldn't get on with him. I'd have to kill him.
If I had to live with me, we'd get on fine, I think, because we like each other. We're nice people.
It would be fine channel surfing. We would get on. But apart from that, I don't know.
It depends which me I'd have to live with. The charming, schmoozy, hi, how are you? Let's have a drink me. That would be good. If you don't do this now, that wouldn't be quite so good.
No way. One would, if Danny John Jules lived with Danny John Jules, one of them would be murdered.
If there's two of you, surely you'd think the same and get on. But it would, I don't know, cost twice as much and to eat and stuff, and I don't know. It'd drive you crazy, wouldn't it, if you had another one of you?
If I lived with myself, I'd probably drive myself mad, actually.
I'm just really glad that I've got a tolerant family who can live with me.
After all those years, only another normal Abbott sitting beside you, hanging around, you tell them to bugger off. I say, no, I can't deal with this. Go away. There's just me, and that's it. You don't work in show business, do you, by any chance?
No, you don't want to live with me. But I'd make you toast in the morning.
It's